Welcome back to the deep dive. We're talking directly to you today.
You definitely know who you are.
Yeah, you are a lifelong learner. You're constantly juggling a million different things, like your deep curiosity, your varied passions, and a schedule that is just packed to the absolute brim.
Completely crammed.
Right. You want to understand the mechanics of the world around you, but finding the uninterrupted time to actually process all of that information is the real challenge.
Which is exactly why we use this time to synthesize the noise. We take all that sprawling data and we distill it down into the core mechanisms that you can actually apply to your life.
And our stack of sources for this deep dive looks beautifully, wondrously chaotic today.
It really does.
If you glanced at my desk right now, it looks like a completely random scattering of internet tabs.
I mean, we've got an academic dissertation analyzing lawyer burnout.
Yep. We have a breakdown of the intense sport of bouldering. We are looking at tactical advice for navigating vintage clothing markets.
A blogger's guide to conquering life admin.
A playbook for hosting the ultimate rainy day movie marathon. And to top it all off, 25 healthy taco recipes.
The beauty of a stack like this is finding the invisible thread that connects them all. Our mission for this deep dive is to use these seemingly unrelated sources to construct a comprehensive blueprint for how we manage our human energy.
We are mapping the ultimate spectrum of work, rest, and play.
Exactly. We will examine how to identify the systemic traps of professional burnout, how to neutralize the daily administrative chores that drain your cognitive reserves, how to efficiently fuel your body, and most importantly, how to forcefully detach your brain through intense physical flow and intentionally curated leisure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the heavy end of the spectrum. We're looking at a dissertation by Carrie Krista Pinkowski, which dives deep into the well-being crisis within the legal profession.
And before you tune this out because you don't practice law,
Hold that thought. Pinkowski's research focuses on lawyers, but the psychological framework she outlines applies to absolutely anyone operating in a high-stress, high-demand corporate environment where your output is just constantly measured.
the legal field serves as a perfect, highly pressurized case study for this. When you look at the raw data she compiled, the scope of the problem becomes undeniable.
It's staggering.
She highlights a national Canadian study by Cadu and colleagues indicating that 73.8% of legal professionals with less than 3 years of experience reported significant psychological distress.
We are talking about nearly 3/4 of an incoming workforce.
Yeah. And she also points to a massive study by Krill showing that 28.3% of the surveyed lawyers suffer from clinical levels of depression.
Those numbers paint a picture of an industry that is fundamentally eating its young. It makes you wonder how an entire sector of highly educated, hyper-competent people ended up in such a dire mental state.
What's fascinating here is how Pinkowski diagnoses the root of this crisis. She introduces a concept called rest neglect.
Rest neglect.
Right. She argues that this epidemic of burnout is not an individual failure of resilience. It is a feature, not a bug, of an organizational culture where a worker's human worth is inextricably tied to their financial productivity and their visible busyness.
She completely tears apart the old metaphor of work-life balance. You know, that classic teeter-totter where you're supposed to perfectly counterbalance your hours at the office with your hours at home.
Because the problem with the teeter-totter is that it assumes the work side of the equation is just heavy, not actively toxic.
Exactly.
The teeter-totter model also assumes that simply being physically away from your desk automatically constitutes recovery. Rest neglect suggests that the culture of constant busyness follows you home.
So you end up neglecting your fundamental biological need to recover because your brain has been deeply conditioned to view unstructured rest as an unproductive waste of time.
You are physically sitting on your couch, but cognitively, you are still running on the office treadmill.
We really need to figure out how to stop our personal lives from turning into a second unpaid shift. And that brings us to our next source, an insightful piece by blogger Monica Beatrice.
She tackles this pervasive modern concept of life admin.
Yeah, and she draws a really important distinction between the domestic load and life admin.
The domestic load is the physical upkeep of your life, like doing laundry or cooking.
Right. But life admin is the invisible bureaucratic red tape of simply existing as an adult in society.
It is the relentless, low-level cognitive tax of tasks that require organization, communication, and decision-making. Negotiating an insurance claim, disputing a parking ticket, or figuring out the logistics of a family schedule.
These tasks don't require physical exertion, but they consume an enormous amount of mental bandwidth.
They really do.
Beatrice offers some incredibly sharp tactical strategies for neutralizing this so it doesn't bleed into your weekend and trigger further rest neglect. Her first major strategy is the one-touch technique.
Which is brilliant.
When a piece of mail or an email comes across your desk, you do not open it, skim it, and put it in a pile to deal with on Friday. You touch it once.
You open it, make the decision, pay the invoice, or file the document immediately.
The psychology behind that is rooted in reducing cognitive load. Every time you walk past a stack of pending mail, your brain expends a microscopic amount of energy, remembering that the task remains incomplete.
It is the Zygarnik effect in action. That's our tendency to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. The one-touch rule closes the loop immediately.
She applies that same ruthless efficiency to things like parking fines. Paying a fine is infuriating, but letting it sit on your counter just generates a low-level hum of anxiety.
Pay it the second you receive it. You often get a municipal discount for early payment, but more importantly, you buy back your mental peace.
My absolute favorite tip of hers, though, is about appointments. She advocates booking your next appointment, your 6-month dental cleaning, your next haircut, your physical therapy, while you are still standing at the reception desk.
By scheduling the next interaction before you even leave the building, you are fundamentally short-circuiting future life admin.
You remove the friction of having to remember to call, finding the time during business hours, and checking your calendar weeks down the line.
It makes a huge difference.
I challenge you, the listener, to think about your own habits here. How many times have you let a routine adjustment at the chiropractor or a simple haircut slide for an extra 2 months, purely because the administrative friction of making the phone call felt too heavy?
And suddenly, a routine maintenance issue becomes a localized crisis because your shoulder is frozen or you have a major presentation and look completely unkempt.
Exactly.
It is a brilliant, localized strategy for reclaiming your cognitive bandwidth. But neutralizing admin is only one side of the equation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you cannot fend off professional burnout and conquer a mountain of bureaucratic life admin without proper fuel.
Cooking is one of those massive domestic load categories that can easily become a daily source of stress.
We need a way to eat well without turning the kitchen into another high-stress job. Our source from the Jar of Lemons blog provides a blueprint for this with over 25 healthy taco recipes.
The transition from organizational psychology to culinary prep might seem a bit sudden, but the underlying philosophy is identical. It's about maximizing efficiency to protect your limited energy reserves.
And genius of this source is that every single meal is engineered to take under 30 minutes from fridge to plate. We are looking at recipes like Baja shrimp tacos, where the shrimp is coated in a quick almond flour breading, topped with cotija cheese and a smoky Baja sauce.
Sounds amazing.
For a plant-based option, they detail a vegetarian jackfruit pulled pork taco that utilizes shredded jackfruit and barbecue sauce to mimic the exact texture and pull of slow-roasted pork.
They also outline a sriracha lime shrimp taco that is naturally gluten-free and requires only 20 minutes of active cooking time.
The hidden gem in this source is their approach to meal prep, which directly combats the fatigue we were just talking about.
Instead of building the tacos ahead of time and ending up with sad, soggy tortillas by Wednesday, they advocate for modular prep.
You cook your proteins, mix your slaws, and blend your sauces on Sunday, then store them all in completely separate, airtight containers in the fridge.
It essentially turns your refrigerator into a localized assembly line. When Wednesday evening rolls around, the friction of cooking is entirely gone. You just heat the tortilla, slice a fresh avocado, and assemble.
You get the quality of a fresh meal with the administrative ease of takeout.
Which is the dream.
Once you are properly fueled and your life admin is neutralized, we have to talk about how to actually detach. If your brain is stuck in the rest neglect loop, sitting still on the couch might just lead to rumination.
Sometimes the only way to clear the cache is through intense physical flow.
I was absolutely captivated by our Wikipedia source on bouldering. This is rock climbing, stripped down to its most raw form. No ropes, no harnesses, usually kept under 6 meters or about 20 feet high.
The history notes a climber named John Gill as the father of modern bouldering in the 1950s, who approached the rock face more like a gymnast than a traditional mountaineer.
But reading through the technical specs, I am totally out of my depth. How do they actually measure the difficulty of a climb? And what kind of gear is keeping someone safe 20 feet in the air without a rope?
The grading systems are a fascinating study in how climbers compartmentalize and communicate challenges. In the U.S., they utilize the V scale. It starts at V0 for absolute beginners and scales all the way up to V17.
E17.
Yes, which represents the bleeding edge of human grip strength and biomechanics. It's reserved for the most elite climbers in the world. In Europe, you will frequently see the Fontainebleau scale used instead.
And regarding safety.
Because you lack ropes, the gear is minimized to the absolute essentials. Climbers rely on large, dense foam crash pads positioned strategically beneath the fall zone, chalk to manage palm moisture, and highly engineered climbing shoes.
Looking at photos of those climbing shoes, they look incredibly intense. They're totally contorted.
They are purpose-built for specific types of movement, much like a specialized tool. If a climber is tackling a steep overhang, they will utilize a shoe with an asymmetric toe box.
Meaning it curves downward.
Aggressively. It allows the climber to essentially hook the rock with their toes and pull their hips inward. Conversely, if they are navigating a flat, vertical slab, they switch to a symmetric shoe to maximize rubber surface contact and friction against the wall.
If we are viewing this through the lens of mental health, hanging by your fingertips sounds deeply stressful. How does this kind of physical exertion actually combat the burnout we started this deep dive with?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, bouldering is the perfect antidote to rest neglect because it demands absolute consuming cognitive presence.
You literally can't think about anything else.
The source breaks down the difference between static movements, which are slow, methodical weight transfers, and dynamic movements, which rely on explosive momentum to reach a hold. Executing either of those requires your full physical and mental bandwidth.
Right. When you are 20 feet off the ground, executing a dynamic leap, you cannot be ruminating over an unread email from your boss.
It is a forced, mandatory break from the cognitive loops of your job. It is an aggressive form of mindfulness.
It literally forces you to stop neglecting your rest by demanding your attention elsewhere. Though the source does point out an important caveat about the environment. Because this often happens outdoors, high foot traffic can lead to severe soil erosion and trampled vegetation at the base of the boulders.
Climbers have a strict ethical obligation to manage their impact and properly brush their chalk off the rock faces when they finish a problem.
It requires an active respect for the environment that hosts the flow state.
Definitely.
Let's shift the energy entirely. Scaling a rock face with contorted toes is not everyone's ideal Friday afternoon. What if you want to enter a flow state without risking a sprained ankle?
That brings us to our source from the Vintage Seeker, which breaks down the tactics of navigating vintage clothing markets.
This is a completely different kind of leisure.
It replaces adrenaline with the thrill of the hunt. It is a low-stakes, highly rewarding form of cognitive engagement.
This source is brilliant because it provides a tactical playbook for both the shopper and the seller. If you're going to these markets to hunt, strategy is everything.
The first major tip is to wear base layers. A thin tank top and bike shorts allow you to try on a jacket or slip on a dress right there in the aisle.
You bypass the friction of waiting 20 minutes for a communal fitting tent. The second tip is to carry a tape measure at all times, with your body measurements and even the dimensions of your living room saved in a note on your phone.
That removes the cognitive fatigue of guessing. It eliminates the buyer's remorse of hauling a mid-century chair home only to realize it doesn't fit through your hallway.
The source also strongly advises doing a second pass of the vendor booths. Vintage booths are so visually dense that your brain physically cannot process every item on the first walkthrough.
You will inevitably spot a hidden gem on round 2.
But what if you, the listener, want to experience this from the other side of the folding table? What if a vintage booth is your ideal weekend side hustle? What does the data say about making that successful?
The data on seller strategy is deeply rooted in behavioral economics. The source emphasizes pricing your core inventory in the $20 to $30 sweet spot.
Why that range specifically?
That specific price range triggers the impulse buy zone for most consumers, where the friction of parting with money is lower than the dopamine hit of acquiring a unique item.
They also advise bringing a full-length mirror, right?
Yes, a mirror acts as an anchor. It keeps potential buyers physically present in your booth longer while they evaluate an item. But the most crucial metric they provide is about human interaction.
This stood out to me.
The article cites a study showing that 68% of customers will abandon a retail space if they feel ignored by the staff.
A simple greeting can literally make or break your profit margin for the day.
It highlights the communal aspect of this specific type of leisure. The transaction is secondary to the social interaction and the curated atmosphere of the market itself.
Sometimes, though, the atmosphere you want is total isolation. Sometimes the vintage market is too crowded, A rock wall is too exhausting, and it is pouring rain outside.
That brings us to our final source from the trending article, the playbook for hosting the ultimate rainy day film festival in your own living room.
The operative word for this source is intentionality.
It is the difference between a restorative leisure activity and a mindless numbing scroll.
You aren't just collapsing onto the couch and letting an algorithm feed you content. You curate a specific experience. You pick a rigid theme.
If you need pure comfort, you program a Disney Classics marathon. The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast.
If you want a psychological thrill, you build a horror festival centered around The Shining. Maybe a coming-of-age retrospective with Lady Bird and the Breakfast Club, or a deep dive into an obscure historical documentary series.
The content is only half the equation. The physical environment dictates how deeply you can detach.
The article emphasizes setting the scene to separate this from a normal Tuesday night watching TV. String up fairy lights, light a specific scented candle to change the olfactory vibe of the room.
And the food has to align with the cinematic theme.
They suggest a massive DIY nacho bar or crafting specific themed drinks. A picture of margaritas if you're watching a beach set comedy, or a massive mug of butterbeer if you are committing to an 8-film Harry Potter marathon.
You are taking the mundane act of watching television and elevating it into a bespoke event.
It is the deliberate, unapologetic crafting of joy. It is the ultimate rebellion against the culture of rest-neglect.
It really is.
We have mapped out a massive spectrum of human energy today. We started by diagnosing the deeply toxic organizational culture of rest-neglect and the genuine well-being crisis in high-stress professions.
We learned how to neutralize the invisible drain of life admin using the one-touch rule and proactive scheduling.
We figured out how to bypass culinary fatigue with 30-minute jackfruit tacos and modular meal prep.
We explored how to aggressively force our brains to detach by solving bouldering problems in asymmetric shoes.
We decoded the behavioral economics of dominating a vintage clothing market. And finally, we learned how to intentionally curate our isolation with a themed movie marathon.
We covered a lot of ground.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at this wildly diverse stack of sources, what is the ultimate takeaway for how we structure our lives?
This raises an important question, and it's a dynamic we haven't touched on yet. We've spent this entire deep dive discussing how to escape the gravitational pull of productivity and fully engage in our rest. But what happens when the tools we use to facilitate our hobbies start mimicking the metrics of our jobs?
That is a fascinating point.
Think about it. We take up bouldering to disconnect, but then we log every single climb on a digital tracking app to monitor our progression on the V-scale.
We curate a beautiful, unique vintage wardrobe, but then we feel compelled to photograph the haul, optimize the lighting, and post it for engagement on a social media feed.
Even the rainy day movie marathon. We immediately log our ratings on Letterboxd to prove to our peers that we have sophisticated cinematic taste.
We end up covertly turning our play right back into work.
The gamification and digitization of our leisure activities can sneakily reintroduce the exact rest neglect we are trying to escape. Are we actually detaching, or are we just creating a secondary, unpaid career out of our own hobbies?
If your rest comes with performance metrics, data tracking, and a public audience, you might need to seriously reevaluate who you are actually resting for.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant final thought to leave you with. If your hobby has KPIs, is it really a hobby? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you take these frameworks, clear out your cognitive clutter, build an incredible taco station, and most importantly, find a way to engage in some truly undocumented, metric-free rest this weekend. We will catch you next time.